All right, as far as playing head games with yourself, we see this constantly in the sport of wrestling. you know, Even from a parenting standpoint, we have if you're sitting in the stands watching a football game, it's usually a pretty relaxed environment, and it's fun watching your kids play soccer and stuff. Um, Wrestling's stressful. Well, it is for the athletes as well, and they start to try to increase their confidence level by thinking sort of outside the box. And one thing we do is we look at common opponents and we say, well, I beat this kid by 6 points, but the other kid beat him by 14. And we just go down these pathways, and pretty soon, you know, 20 minutes has gone by and the kid's just lost in the woods. I think it's best just to say, I don't play those games with myself. Sure, sometimes if I hear through the grapevine that, the kid I pinned twice only beat this other opponent by one, and it helps me, I might engage in those scenarios that boost my confidence. But generally, it's best just to draw a line in the sand and just refuse to play those kind of games with yourself. And that's kind of hard to do, especially when you get pretty good at wrestling. There's a lot of opponents you can beat. When you're starting out, maybe you don't have a lot of success. Every match is a close match. You kind of expect it. I know when I was a kid, I talked with my brother and Sammy Henson, and I remember we were just talking sometime. It was in college, I think, maybe after college years ago. And Sam said, being from Missouri hurt all of us. Because, we pinned or tech falled our way through the state tournament our last 2 years of wrestling, and my brother and I pinned or tech falled our way through the whole season our last 2 years of wrestling, minus one match for him and I think 2 matches for me. So, 80-something opponents, you're pin or tech 79 or 8 of them. Then what happens when you go to junior nationals and you have a real good Ohio kid or a Pennsylvania kid, and you're just inundated with close matches? It's something else. And I know that, I think it was Sam that said, in college, if I didn't have an 8-0 lead after the first period, I went into a full-blown panic attack, because that's how we grew up. But you see the kids from California and Pennsylvania and the best wrestling states, they always have tough matches. This is part of the deal. I remember my brother was telling me he was recruiting at one point in time, and this kid from Pennsylvania said, why are you recruiting that wrestler? And Tony goes, well, he's fourth in the state. He's a great wrestler. He's like, Tony, I killed that kid. He's like, you killed him? He goes, yeah, I destroyed him. Tony said, holy cow, what was the score? And this Pennsylvania kid said, Tony, I beat him 4-2. And so Tony was laughing about this because, in Missouri, 4-2 is not, didn't mean you killed somebody. But in the meat grinder that is Pennsylvania wrestling, that can be. So it's just interesting. But I think what happens is, as we get, if you're from those states, or especially when you get in college, if you're at a big college, I know we wrestled Oklahoma State, and we were in a tough schedule. Everybody was a 4-time state champ, a 3-time junior national Fargo champ. It was just like, you just say, okay, I assume everybody, the top guys were ranked top 10 of the nation in Division I wrestling, and you just kind of didn't care anymore. You couldn't, because you have no choice. You've got a roster full of kids, and every one of them is one of the best ever from their state, and you just kind of just quit worrying about it. Well, what happens is, I think that, especially if those of us are from a more of a normal wrestling state, when you get very good, there might be, sometimes you want to hold on to this wonderful career you've had so far, and then you start to play these head games with yourself. So I think it's important for those kids in that situation. A lot of it just comes down to a refusal. You refuse to play head games with yourself. I'm not going to do it. I refuse to let myself worry about these matches, because I know it's not going to help. My mind can only focus. Your mind can go 1,000 miles an hour, but it can only focus on one thing at a time. So what if you say, I'm focused on scoring the first takedown. That's it. And every time we have kind of a system for, getting ready for our matches. We try to have a system for everything, and we talk about these things at camps and our academy and clinics and all that. But whenever I find myself thinking negatively, I focus on my body language and my breathing. Body language is huge, because what happens is when you start to worry, you start to slump down, you start to pace, you start to pant. And so when I find myself thinking negative, we say, hey, snap out of it, take a couple deep breaths, put your confident body language on, and get back in gear. Start looking like a champion. Start acting and breathing and looking like a champion. And that's a good way to constantly snap out of it, or reconnect with the competitive, the type of athlete that actually has a fighting chance. So as far as playing head games with yourself, it's one of those things that you have to recognize that you do. I know Mark Schwab is an awesome peak performance guy, works with a lot of wrestlers of ours, and he calls it self-awareness. Be aware of what you're doing and then stop it. Some people are screwing it all up and they don't even know it. So as far as playing head games with yourself, recognize that it doesn't help, and that in fact it only hurts. Why would you do things that hurt you? Why engage in activities that hurt your chances? That makes no sense. Let's engage in activities that help our chances. And then sometimes we say, well, yeah, but I want a guarantee. I don't want just help. I want to know I'm going to win. And then you just got to say, well, there's never a 100% guarantee. Just because the ref can make a bad call, you could blow your knee out. My son just got a concussion at a big tournament. We didn't know that was going to happen. So you got to say, I signed up for wrestling. I didn't sign up for guarantees. Knock it off. Quit engaging in that activity or that behavior. Focus on looking like you're the champion, breathing deep, walking around the room like you belong to be there. Think about being great. Think about being the champ. Think about getting the first takedown. And you kind of can create this emotion of competitiveness that can really, put you into a new level. I remember I used to wrestle this guy all the time, and he was a great wrestler, 4-time Division I All-American and junior national champ in high school. And I said, you always seem to wrestle well in your matches, even in high school and college, and was in the Olympic trials, was a runner-up. I go, what did you do? This is 20 years ago when I first started a wrestling company. And he was like, you know what I do? He goes, when I find myself thinking negative, I start thinking about the crowd, how exciting it is, how my opponent wants to beat me, and how that affects me as a man and how I want to fight back. I think about how nervous my parents are in the stands and how, the anxiety that they have, but yet they're excited to watch me. And that's something that's cool, And he had a big opponent. He ended up losing, but he wrestled well. He goes, I know this guy. He hates me. He goes, and I think about the fact that he hates me, and that gets me excited about the match. And I know he's really physical, and I know he's going to try to beat me up. And I'm like, yeah, I want you to try to beat me up, And so instead of being afraid of the guy's physicality, he's like, I want you to hit me. The harder you hit me, the better. I'm coming for you. I'm not taking a back seat to you for a second. And he just kind of got excited about the competitive emotions of wrestling. And he goes, I went from being sort of scared, thinking about, here we go again, I may not make the team. 4 years later, I have not beaten this guy in 2 years, and I got him in the finals. And he goes, I snapped out of it, and I went from being kind of nervous and self-defeated within 45 seconds. He goes, I had goosebumps. I could not wait to run up onto that stage and wrestle this guy. And he's like, no, I'll tell you I didn't win, which I already knew that. He's like, but I wrestled one of the best matches of my life, and it's something that I'll always remember. So there's some good advice as far as refusing to play these games with yourself. And like I said, your mind works 1,000 miles a minute, but it can only think of one thing at a time. So you got to say, I'm going to quit thinking about this. I'm going to start thinking about that. And if you learn to be aware of when you're screwing it all up and you snap out of it, and you stand up with good body language and start breathing deep, and then you start engaging in these good self-talk, wrestling gets really fun. You know, if a race car driver is thinking about crashing and burning to death in a crash, he's not going to race very well. If he's thinking about winning the race and, you know, nudging his opponents out of the way and crossing the finish line and this checkered flag and, you know, the money and the champagne and being on TV and all the cool interviews he gets to go on after he's the NASCAR champ. I mean, that guy that's engaging in that thought process, I mean, he's racing and he's going to be hard to beat. And the good thing is that most of our wrestling opponents and their coaches, some of them, and their parents, they don't do that. We get into these negative, self-defeating thought processes. So there's some pretty good advice. Hopefully it helps some of these kids out there. And good luck. Hit the subscribe button.